I would much rather take an athlete who has a year straight of B plus days than has an A plus day every few weeks and the rest of the days are F. I think working across pro sports and my own training, and the more I understand exercise physiology, the more I would say the best athletes are ones who are show up every day and are consistent, maintain training over time.
That was Jonah Rosner today on the Running Effect podcast. And guys, let me tell you, you might not know his name yet, but that's the key word, yet, because this man is a genius. He's a sports scientist and he is one of one. I found so much value from this conversation that we got towards the end of having to wrap it up. And I was like, there are like 5 editions worth of information that I feel like I could extract from this man. And he's just so full of wisdom in regards to all the subjects, from zone 2 training to are strides beneficial to super shoes to epigenetics, to like everything that you need to know from a science perspective that you can directly apply into your training and life today. To give you a brief background on him, he's an applied sports scientist based out of Brooklyn, New York, and he spent the past roughly 10 years working with athletes and teams from all major American professional sports teams. Most recently, he was the sports science coordinator for the Houston Texans in the NFL. And at 25 years old at the time, he was one of the youngest sports scientists in NFL history. He has a passion for the sport of running. He's a runner himself. He's actually quite accomplished. He has a marathon PR of 2:57, which he ran at the Chicago Marathon, and he's regularly logging 80 to 90 mile weeks with strength training included. So he practices what he preaches. Guys, this one, share it with all your friends because it is freaking packed with wisdom, and you're going to be able to walk away from this conversation with the tools necessary to take your running to the next level, because you'll be applied, because you're going to be equipped with the necessary information to do so. The other thing I would greatly appreciate it is giving us a 5-star review and making sure you are follow or subscribe to the podcast so you never miss another episode. And without further ado, enjoy this conversation with the one and only Mr. Jonah Rosner. Mr. Jonah Rosner. Now I'm like tweaking of if I said that right. Did I say that right?
You got it, man. Spot on.
How you doing this afternoon? Appreciate you coming on the podcast. Excited for it.
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Let's start out here. I did share with you that I'm running a marathon in 3 days off of 2 weeks of training. As a sports scientist, how much does that worry you?
I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I'm a big believer in both the physical and psychological side of the sport. So I think psychologically, you're going to wear yourself to a finish and you're going to crush it.
How much does the mental side of all things in life across all sports matter for our physical output?
I think it's huge. And I think it's still so understated. As someone who's worked across every sport, I used to think that performance was so physically dominated. And that's what originally got me into sports, the physical side of it. And the more I was around some of these unbelievable NBA, NFL players, the more I noticed these athletes who, like, they are physically impressive, but some of them where I was just like, you're physically I expected you to be more impressive, like jumping, speed. And you guys, what makes them special is psychological side, their ability to make these decisions within the sport, and maybe psychologically their ability to bounce back was really fascinating and just be consistent. So I think if you look at the human in general, and that's how I kind of like to approach most of my performances, you can't separate the physical from the psychological or the mental. It's all this big, holistic, complex piece that comes together to allow you to perform. And I think they go hand in hand. But you see some athletes who maybe are more physically gifted and some who use the psychological mental side to have success. So there's a lot of ways to be successful.
Is there a specific story or experience that you personally experienced in terms of realizing an athlete or you yourself needed the mental side to take them to the next level or accomplish something? Was there an experience or a story where you it clicked for you, like, oh, the mental side does matter?
Yeah. I mean, I won't talk too much about myself since I'm not too much of an impressive athlete, but I will say probably after my first marathon was when I really realized the mental side of the sport in general, where such a huge mental component to the marathon and distance running in general. But I'll give a quick anecdote about some other experiences I've had, especially just working in pro sports. I think something that was really interesting was I was in the NFL working with the Texans. We had a lot of guys from the Patriots and who came from that Patriot system where football was, they just obviously had unbelievable leaders through Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, and a lot of the wide receivers came from the Patriots. And they talked about Tom Brady a lot and him and who he was. And something that they all said, like, I would just ask them, like, what made Tom special? And they want to talk to each other about it before they answer me, obviously. But something they anecdotally all said to me was just like he would make mistakes like all of us, but they had never met anyone who can bounce back from a mistake so quickly and kind of just forget about it and maintain their consistency, whether it was in a practice, in a game, or day to day. And I thought that was really interesting because I think that really is a key part of like the human condition is like when I mess up, I kind of get mad at myself and I dwell on it. But I've realized talking to them and just some of the best athletes I've been around since talking to those individuals and those moments, they're almost the best at like forgetting the mistakes or in the moment saying, okay, I messed up, I'm going to move on, and then I'll reflect on it later when I have more time. So I think that's something that's been really interesting for me to realize and understand because in running a marathon, you have 26 miles or in any pursuit of life, something inevitably is going to go wrong. And how quickly can you understand that, okay, that's okay, and I'm just going to keep moving forward? I think that's a really important lesson in sport, but also life.
Such good insight right there. I realize we are definitely going down some deep rabbit holes, which I love. But let's give some people, and I'm sure I said it in the introduction before the episode, but let's give some people some intro to you and what you do. How would you describe who you are, what you're passionate about, and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Ooh, I'm definitely still figuring that out, but yeah, as we mentioned, I'm Jonah. So I guess professionally, the way I tell people what I do today is I'm a sports scientist by trade. And essentially, for the past over 10 years now, I've made my career out of utilizing technology and exercise physiology and the combination of those two. So essentially, just finished up a 10 plus year career working in the NFL most recently with the Houston Texans. But before that, did some work in the NBA, professional soccer, Division One college sports. Well, essentially, my job was to utilize biomechanical testing, metabolic testing. So, like when you see athletes wear the mask, you see them jump on the special plates, and use that to understand the individual athlete in front of me, and then give them personal or individualized strength training plans, conditioning plans, and then also model them over time through technology to keep them healthy and to potentially keep them performing at their best, utilizing the technology and some of the feedback, for example, like the heart rate variability stuff, their heart rate in general, the speeds they're running at, how their jump performance changes day to day, and questionnaires. So all that stuff. And essentially, what I do now is take a lot of those findings. I still work with a lot of those team sport players 101, but I work a lot now with runners. Distance runners, general population, and we have a few different communities, but performance training as well, where apply a lot of the same frameworks by utilizing your training data that you get from your watch to give you individualized training programs, analyze your programs, keep you healthy, and then also provide education along the way.
Very like direct question after all of that, but what is one finding from your research and studying and work throughout the years that you think would be beneficial to the general audience here that they can apply into their running or training directly today?
Consistency. I would much rather take an athlete who has a year straight of B plus days than has an A plus day every few weeks and the rest of the days are F. I think working across pro sports and my own training and the more I understand exercise physiology, the more I would say the best athletes are ones who are show up every day and are consistent, maintain training over time, and they don't just have like these really bad days. They always don't, and they don't always have these home runs either. Just day after day, stringing together great training is what's really going to lead to success.
I might totally butcher this quote, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw it because I think it went semi-viral. But it was Chris Williamson, and he was
Yep,
like, "Yeah, he was like, being consistent won't guarantee success, but not being consistent will almost guarantee failure." And I think it's super
100%.
true.
And that's like all the best athletes I've ever worked with. It's just, the ones who have had a lot of longevity in their leagues. They just show up day after day and do the good stuff.
Do you find across these sports that the people who made it to the professional leagues are talented versus hard work? What's your opinion on that
I
as
think
a sports scientist?
I think it's a combination, and it's depends on the individual. To be completely honest, I've met some athletes who were very successful and who people know their names, big names, who genetically and physically were just so gifted that they were going to make it there no matter what. But when you actually worked with them, they were too hardworking and they actually couldn't care less, which was interesting. But at the same time, I also understood that like it was the whole life playing that sport and that's what defined them. So maybe they were a little tired or burnt out at that point. But then at the same time, I had other athletes who maybe were the most physically talented, but they worked really hard to get there. And then you get the special athlete who I think is a combination, who is physically talented and super hardworking, and those are the ones who really shine.
A concept I've been chewing on probably for the last couple months, more so towards the end of last year. I forgot about it, and now I'm remembering it again. Do you think that like the ability, and it's hard to put into words, but the ability to work hard is like a talent and like a gene of sorts.
I
Because I've
really
noticed this with some people,
do.
like they just have this awe, and this was me back in high school with running. Like I wasn't the most talented, but I almost feel like my ability to work hard was a gene and talent. And I would tell teammates like, "Well, just run 60 miles a week," and they just like they didn't have it, and it was like you either had that drive or you didn't. And I almost feel like sometimes that is innate, and you can't force it.
I 100% agree. I think now we're seeing this whole new field develop called like epigenetics, and we're understanding more like genetics in general. And I think like some of these psychological traits we see in individuals, whether it's consistency, persistence, or hardworking, there is a genetic component to it. And there's this underlying DNA that probably contributes. And I do think, as you alluded to, like obviously it's always a combination as someone who like is very big on complexity of the environmental conditions, nature and nurture, like your genetic and the environment you were raised in. But I do think that there is a component where some people are probably just more naturally inclined based on their underlying genes and psychology to be consistent and work hard.
So fascinating. So fascinating. And epigenetics, what are your findings there? And you said that's like a new kind of research, new research. Like how often is stuff popping up on your radar that it's like, wow, we're so complex.
Yeah, the genome stuff is crazy. The DNA stuff is popping up every day. And like obviously now like we've been known about epigenetics and some of that genetic stuff for a while now and some of the genome testing, but we're seeing now too, like there's all these theories and stuff, like if we can manipulate that before an individual is even born, and even like what happens when yeah, like as you're in the womb or like with your mother or whatever, and like some of these like environmental factors around you are probably influencing the gene expression and what that's going to be when you grow up. So I think it can't be understated like how critical those epigenetic components can be. And there's a lot where I come from too now, even during some of my last days in team sports, we are doing a lot of epi DNA genetic research on athletes and saying, hey, do some of the hereditary traits that they had before they were even born contribute to who they are as athletics, and is there commonalities in some of these athletes' DNA? And there's some really interesting stuff coming out about like some of the fast twitch muscle fibers, like from some of the genetic components of that leading to athletic success for slow twitch, for example, and some of the genetic predeterminations of that. So I think it's a huge component, and we're just going to learn more and more. But DNA is super complex, but it's really fascinating. And some of the stuff I nerd out on.
This is probably deep in TMI. So if you think this is too much for the listener or too personal or private, we can cut it.
We can edit.
Exactly. But I asked my brother about this because I was really interested, and I feel like you would know the actual science behind this. I'm curious of like, not that I'm like trying to like create these like super Olympians one day, not at all. But I thought like when I think of myself, I think when I'm like 25, my like VO2 max will be higher. I'll be like way more ripped. I'll be like way my like I will just be a better individual. And so I thought like if I had a kid, if I was married and had a kid when I'm 19 now, almost 20 next month, versus if I had a kid when I was 23, but all those things were like higher, how much does that influence the kids like genetic makeup, their DNA, their athletic potential, versus is it just stagnant because like my
They're
DNA,
the
like
same.
is it the same?
Oh
Yeah.
man, this is beyond me. I, as a scientist, I always like to speak when I'm not an expert, and there's definitely a lot of experts in DNA and the genome who could speak more to me. I don't know how much it would influence it. I do think where you are in life environmentally does potentially affect the DNA you pass on to your children. But I wouldn't know the answer to that. I don't know how much it would contribute, honestly. But it's a really fascinating question that I'm sure someone who with a lot more expertise in that area would have a better answer for you than I could.
So fascinated. Have you done any research or studying? I just know from like the guests that I have on in terms of like that similar line of like kids and their athletic ability. I think it is more likely, right? If you have two Olympic parents, you're going to
Yeah,
be an Olympian. But like, have you thought about or studied like that sort of, how much
yeah.
your athletic potential is hindered or strengthened by who your parents are?
I mean, I think it's a huge component of it. Genetics, like the more we study athletics, we know genetics, especially like some of these extremely powerful and explosive athletes, is very heritable. And like I alluded to earlier, a lot of it is based on like that muscle typography, which is like the amount of or phenotype, the amount of fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers you have. We know there's a huge genetic component to that. And there's individuals, like a lot of the athletes who I've worked with in team sports, who are very fast twitch dominant, extremely explosive, their ability to build muscle very easily and powerful. We know there's a huge genetic component to like fast twitch muscle fiber. And they were just naturally, because their parents probably had some of those phenotypes too, passed it on to them. So I think we know now from some of the research, it's a huge component, especially for like the strength, power, and speed side of the fast twitch fibers.
This does kind of come back to the question that you said you don't fully know on, but for that stuff, again, this is just part of my ignorance of not knowing these things. That's why you're on. That's why you're telling me about them. But like, does that just come natural in terms of like the genetic side, like the fast twitch fibers? Is that just like the parents have it and it just gets passed on, or was it through the parents training and becoming really good athletes that it gets passed on because they like gain new muscle fibers and all of that?
A lot of it's probably based on the original genetics of the
Okay.
parents, from my understanding. Again, I'm ignorant too, but that's my understanding of the most recent science. So there probably is a huge evolutionary component too, like based on the family ties from hereditary standpoint, like where they were like fast twitch versus slow twitch based on from an evolutionary standpoint where they were located geographically.
I'm sure when you see someone like a Grant Fisher or Jakob Ingebrigtsen, I'm just guessing they're way more slow
Yeah.
twitch fiber just based on what they run, how they
Yep.
train. How are people like that able to be slow twitch fiber but still close a race after 6 miles of work in like a 53-54?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. They definitely do like some of those resistance guys have a combination of some of the faster trapper too. But even when they're running at like that 53 or 54, it's actually more of it's very much a slow twitch dominant pace, believe it or not. The fast twitch muscle fibers, we have all these different type of muscle fibers. You have these things called type 2X, which are the fastest, most explosive, type 2A, which are the combination of fast and slow twitch, and these type 1 fibers, which are like the slow twitch fibers, as you alluded to. Those athletes are very type 1 dominant, as you alluded to. Anything like the type 2 fibers are really for like that 100-meter sprint or less. And anything that isn't like that maximal intensity 100-meter sprint, those fibers aren't going to be too efficient for. They could definitely contribute to some of those aerobic, and they definitely are activated as they're going in that final push, but they're not even that efficient for those paces. Like even like that mile, anything above a mile, like 800-meter, you get some combo guys who are fast twitch versus slow twitch in the 800-meter. But anything beyond that, most of them are these slow twitch dominant athletes. And that's because for any of those events beyond the 800, even the mile is very much an aerobic or oxygen dominant event, where it's still going to be based on how much oxygen your body can use. And so the best athletes at those are still going to be slow twitch. The fast twitch are very much reserved for like that is extremely explosive events is where you're going to find the very much fast twitch dominant guys.
Can you switch from fast twitch to slow twitch or vice versa?
It's hard. It's definitely something that we know is difficult, but that's where training comes in. And I think that we know now there is a huge training component to it, where as someone does more aerobic training, more endurance training, one of the key adaptations we see from endurance training is we probably do see a conversion from these type 2 to those type 1 fibers to oversimplify it. And that's going to be a beneficial adaptation for any endurance runner because those fibers for those slower speeds that we do endurance at are much more efficient. They consume less energy and they're much better with oxygen than the type 2. They accrue less damage. You're going to recover better. And at the same time, vice versa, we do get some potential adaptations to more type 2 from the sprint training. You're going to activate and potentially convert to more type 2 fibers from like extremely explosive, high velocity weight room work or the sprint training.
When it comes to what you were just sharing there, how does something like strides come into play? I think a lot of the listeners here do strides on a daily basis.
Yeah,
What's your take on those? And do you think those are pretty beneficial to bridge the gap between
huge.
like a
Yep.
7 mile easy run and still touching some speed?
Huge. I think it's extremely beneficial. There's a few things why I really like strides. Number one, we know that sprint training in general probably is going to improve your overall running economy. Running economy is something where how much energy it costs you to run a given pace. So if it costs you less energy to run a given pace, you're going to be more efficient. And sprint training or strides help with that because they make your body better at recruiting muscle in a more efficient manner. So your body and your brain just work better together. Your brain gets better at understanding how to coordinate or how to fire your muscles in a more efficient way. So you consume less energy. Strides also are going to activate those fast twitch muscle fibers and train them. So no matter what, even if you are the best endurance runner or whatever, you still will have potentially some fast twitch fibers. And those fast twitch fibers are going to be beneficial to be able to use them at times when you do need that final kick, for example, at the end of the race. So strides will be beneficial for activating and training to make those fast twitch fibers stronger, to make it simple. One like distance running probably is going to be a great way to activate and train those fibers. And lastly, you get some similar adaptations from strides that you would get from like even in the weight room or strength, where the muscle is just going to get stronger overall and it's going to be better at coordination. Huge fan of strides just because it gives you a stimulus you're not going to get from distance running. Some of the speed and fast twitch adaptations that probably are beneficial for distance runners.
What would you so many questions on my head and I'm losing my train of thought now.
No worries.
What would you say is the biggest marker that is most important? Is it VO2 max? Is it running economy? Like what's the king of them all?
It depends on your goal, the event. For the marathon, I think so when we model the marathon or distance-based events and endurance sports, we have this model. And this model essentially says that there's these key components that contribute to endurance performance. It's called the original Joyner model, and it's been updated now with some new variables, but it's a combination of VO2 max, which is your ceiling for aerobic performance. So our aerobic or distance events have to occur below your VO2 max pace. It's kind of the size of your engine. And then you have your threshold is the second variable, which is that maximal sustainable running pace, which you everyone talk about. So that's below the VO2 max. And then you have your running economy, which essentially is, as we talked about earlier, how efficient you are at your marathon pace, or the pace you're running your event at. So the best runners like Kipchoge, he consumes less oxygen or less energy to run that pace. And those are the original three variables. And we have this new variable called durability, which is essentially how good you are at resisting fatigue. Because once you get to the end of a marathon or a very long duration event, you accrue fatigue or your muscles and body get tired. And we know that's going to change the way you run. It's going to make you less efficient. And we actually see it as a separate characteristic from VO2 max threshold and economy. And it's probably something that really separates like individuals like Kipchoge and some of these best runners where they're more fatigue resistant, we can say. So the fatigue hurts them less. So those are the original variables that we know contribute to endurance performance. If we were going to say like the ones out of all of those that matter the most for something like a marathon, VO2 max is actually probably the least important. When you go to elite runners, VO2 max doesn't separate the best of the best. What separates the best is that durability and the running economy, probably.
I Let's talk about threshold because you mentioned that. I think that's a good bridge of the gap. It's the hot word these days. What is threshold? And can you? I'm sure you know this, but what's your take on like the difference between a normal human being and their marathon pace and it being X% of their threshold pace versus like a Kipchoge where I think he
Yeah,
can just like maintain threshold for
like
yeah a
95%
ridiculous
is
amount
like his
compared to
threshold.
the average individual.
Yeah, so typically in classic exercise physiology, you have a few thresholds which separate those training zones you everyone talk about, like the zone two, zone five, all that good stuff. So we typically say you have two thresholds. The threshold everyone talks about is the second threshold, and there's different ways to define it, but probably the one people have heard the most is lactate. You can also define it with ventilation or critical speed. So when we say the second lactate threshold, all that means is that you get to a running speed where your body is always producing lactate, but it's always reusing lactate. So it would actually accumulate to a point where it causes, well, it's not actually causing fatigue, but where you see a lot of it in the blood. But at some point, you'll get to a certain speed where your muscles, because of the demand for energy, is so high, are producing more lactate than your body can reuse and clear. And so that's the cyclolactate threshold. When you get to a certain speed, that from a metabolic or energy standpoint, there's such a huge demand for energy on your body that your body's producing more lactate than it can use. And because of that, that speed's not sustainable. So we call it a sustainable running pace. So once you get above that second lactate threshold is when your body goes into kind of chaos mode, when it's like I can't hold this for too long, like whatever, 45 minutes, an hour, depending on how long you are, because of all these different things that are happening inside the muscle that are going to cause you to get tired and slow down. And then the first lactate threshold is a first rise in lactate above your baseline level, like, but your body can handle that easily. Your body just starts revving up and clearing that lactate. The main one we have to worry about is that second lactate threshold, which again, it's just you can't hold that pace because your body is producing more metabolites or more things that cause your body to fatigue than it could clear. And in regards to like some of the elite marathoners, that's a key characteristic that separates elite marathoners from non-elite marathoners. Elite marathoners run their marathon pace very close to their lactate threshold. So like Kipchoge runs his marathon pace like 95% of his threshold. And because of his physiological adaptations he's accrued, he can hold his lactate threshold pace or very close to it for a long time for a marathon, and also because a marathon takes him close to 2 hours. Or like someone like me, like I probably only run at 88 or 89% of my threshold at my marathon pace, just because I'm not physiologically as adapted to run close to threshold, and it takes me a lot longer to run a marathon.
Should threshold and threshold pace or concept be something people should focus on? And if so, how do they go about that in a good way? Because I see a lot of college runners, specific, even D1 runners, will do like 5 by mile at threshold, but they'll run it at like 5K pace. And I'm like, that is not what threshold pace is. Like a 5 mile tempo is not 5 miles at like your 8K race effort minus a couple seconds.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for like a marathon or actually any distance running event, threshold's key. And most individuals, the goal is because a marathon or like most events, like a marathon has to take place below a threshold. If you raise the threshold up, then your marathon pace is going to have more capacity. You're going to have more potential to raise your marathon pace up. Because if not, it's going to be capped by that threshold. In regards to individuals who need to work on threshold, we see that you have the VO2 max, you have the threshold, and you have, like, for example, your marathon pace. If your threshold is already at your VO2 max pace, and it's kind of capped by VO2 max, then first you want to raise the VO2 max up and then the threshold. Or if your marathon pace is already at your threshold, then you need to raise the threshold up. So I kind of like to look at it as a house. The ceiling's your VO2 max. The threshold is kind of like that roof below the ceiling, and then your marathon pace is kind of like the base, whatever. So if there's cramming here, you first have to raise the ceiling, the VO2 max, then you can raise the threshold, and then you can raise that base, your marathon pace. And vice versa. Maybe sometimes the ceiling's already really high and the threshold's low, so then you would focus on the threshold and move that up. In regards to the best way to improve those different metrics, kind of exactly what you said, in exercise physiology and training, there's this element of specificity. You're going to get best at the paces you run. So if your goal is to move your threshold up, I would probably run close to your threshold, right below it, or right at it. And you brought up such an excellent point. Why do we not want to like do a ton of work above that threshold? Because when you do a ton of that speed work above that threshold, could it move your threshold up? Maybe. But you're not going to be able to do a ton of it because, as we talked about earlier, when you go above that threshold, you create all this chaos in your body, and that chaos causes a lot of fatigue that you can't recover from. So if you can't recover, you're not going to be consistent. You're not going to be able to run a lot of volume at threshold, and you're not going to be able to get better over time because that volume is going to be a key stimulus. It's why these like double threshold or this method has become so popular, where a lot of these elite runners are slowing down a little bit. So they run below the threshold for the threshold days, but they're doing more volume. And they think that if they can run more volume, that's going to be a better stimulus for them to move that threshold up. And I tend to agree. I would say if you're an experienced runner with a lot of experience, the number one thing is going to be consistency, just doing sessions of easy work, some hard work, some threshold work over years and years. It's what's going to make you better. New runners will get better no matter what. But I would recommend for an experienced runner to do a little bit easier intensity. You'd rather go below that threshold than above it, because once you go above it, you create all this extra fatigue that's going to hurt your runs. Where go below it and just do a little more volume. You'll recover better and you'll accumulate more volume, which is going to be a really important stimulus to move that threshold up.
Classic question: volume or intensity?
It depends on the individual, what they've done historically. I think a combination of the two is what's going to lead to the best success. But I think where a lot of people go wrong is they try to, there's a reason that the best runners are doing so much volume, and that's because you can only do so much intensity until your body breaks. And the volume, you can do a ton of volume of easy work, and your body tends to handle it okay.
Let's talk about a critical tool over the past years that I think people have used to boost both of those: shoes and super shoes. What's your
Yeah,
take on all of that? And how can people use, or how have you seen people use them to really up their training and do more while
yeah.
staying
There's
healthy?
there's some really fascinating research and some fascinating articles. I'm sure you've seen about this too. One of the key characteristics of super shoes is they essentially decrease the amount of work your muscles, tendons, and everything are doing. They take on some of the work. So then there's less damage to the lower body musculature and the legs. So if there's less damage to the lower body musculature and legs, which is often a limiting factor in running, is the muscle damage you get with running. That means less muscle damage. I could run more often. I could run more volume, potentially better adaptations, right? As you alluded to. I think it's a really interesting tool, and I think you should use it correctly. I think for some of these high volume runners who have high aspirations for these distance events, those are the reason they're wearing them often. It lets them, they anecdotally say they recover better and they accumulate more volume. So I'm a fan of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think sometimes people get into trouble is if you use it as a tool where you can run so much extra volume that your training loads are so high, and then it's really hard to make sure you're actually getting in the energy, like you're eating enough food, you're getting enough calories, you're getting enough energy in, so your body's recovering. So I would just say be careful of doing too much too soon, because with the shoes you may be able to do a lot more, but that's also potentially a recipe for disaster. If all of a sudden you start doing a lot more running, is a potential risk factor. And for most everyday runner, I just want to wear them every day because there's a benefit of switching up shoes. You're going to load your muscles differently. You're going to expose different joints, tendons, muscles to different stress, and getting variability in how we apply stress to the tissues or the muscles or the bones is going to be valuable over time because we just want to expose different joints to different stresses.
Yeah, what would you say is the correct balance between using super shoes and not using them? And you think if someone's like super sore on a day,
Yeah,
should they pull them out? Yeah, I know it's also like context dependent. Like most people listening
exactly.
have to buy them, but like I get so much hate, Jonah, for wearing them, and I'm like,
Dude, I wear my super
I get them
shoes.
for free,
Yeah,
guys.
and I wear my super shoes 2 to 3 times a week, just exactly like you alluded to. I use them as a tool. So any day I'm doing a marathon specific session or I'm doing speed work, I'm probably in super shoes. I'm at the point now where I'm trying to run a lot of volume, and I know they let me do those faster sessions for less damage, and I bounce back quicker, like a lot of the pros you talk to too. So I would wear them for any kind of quality session, me personally, and if you're a high volume, serious runner, speed work, marathon training sessions. Another interesting thing you brought is recovery. We have some interesting research that came out of a lab with some of the former Nike Breaky 2 researchers that showed when you wear these max cushion shoes the day after a damaging workout, it kind of allows you to recover better, was the main takeaway. So if I have a day where I'm super sore, but I need to get some volume in, I may not always wear super shoes, but I'll wear a shoe that has a really big cushioning in it, max cushioning, or maybe I'll wear a super shoe just so I can do the run and not cause more muscle damage or mitigate the amount of muscle damage I run. So exactly what you said is how I would use them.
What's fascinating, and you may have heard this or known this, but I don't really think it's public. I just know the inner workings of the team. The Bowerman Track Club, which is kind of Nike's premier track club, they do more workouts now than they used to, and they're spiked up more than they used to. And the biggest reason is literally because of the super shoes,
Yep,
and they can run paces in sessions in spikes and be less beat up doing more than
exactly.
they used to be doing less wearing like the Nike Matumbos, which was literally like you were scraping the concrete wearing
Exactly.
these spikes.
It could, and you would argue that for them it's beneficial because then they get more stimulus at those faster speeds, which should hopefully lead to better training and adaptation over time. So that's a perfect use case, exactly.
Do you find issue or problem in general society today or high school or college? I don't really see it at the pro level because generally if you made it to the pros, you know how to train. Of like people doing race pace too much and not adding in enough of the, talking about the training kind of
Base.
pyramid. Yeah,
Yeah.
like the supplemental paces. So let's say if I'm running a marathon, let's do 10K and my goal pace is 5:35. Every workout is like 8x800 at 5:35 pace.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. It's a great question because we said earlier, like one of the keys is specificity. You need to train at the paces you want to run at, right? But you also brought up an excellent point. These other paces are probably important too. If you only train at the pace you run at, you're not going to get some of the potential beneficial adaptations you would get from the slower speeds or even the faster speeds above your race pace. One of my favorite coaches of all time is Renato Canova, and he had this idea, this funnel periodization, where he works at all different speeds throughout the whole entire training program. So he always has some fast days in there. He always has some slower days in there. As you get closer to the race, you run more and more at your race pace, which makes sense. You want to practice as you get closer. And the farther away you are from the race, you do more of these general qualities. So if your goal is the 5K, beginning far away from the race, you do a lot of base easy miles and a lot of super fast sprints. And then as you get closer, you do more 5K work, for example, exactly like you said. And then the idea is you're probably going to get some good base adaptations early on from some of that general endurance prep to build that aerobic base and some of that fast twitch power and speed stuff. And if you have those general physical qualities, once you get closer to the race, that's going to support your 5K work. Because if your 5K is right here and this is your pace, and you go into your 5K specific block and your max sprint speed is right here, that 5K pace doesn't have a lot of room to go. But if I come in after my base phase, because I did a lot of general speed work, and my max sprint speed is here, then I can kind of raise my 5K pace up more and more during the specific phase. And just like the other thing that's always important to bring up in this conversation is you can only do so much 5K or intensity pace, for example, race pace in a week before your body's get a break. Like that stuff comes at a cost. And like if you've done a 5K pace workout on a track, you know that you get more tired than easy runs. And there's a reason even 5K runners do a ton of volume. That volume creates like mitochondria adaptations, specific adaptations that are going to boost your race performance. And you can only get that kind of volume at easy pace because you can recover enough to accumulate the volume.
So fascinating. Again, so many questions in my head, and I don't even know where to start. Let's see. I mean, something I'm curious. You said mitochondria. I think another word across the aisle is like your musco. Actually, real quick, I'm remembering what I was going to say.
Yeah,
Do you follow college sports much, like college running?
huge. All
Okay,
sports.
so Ethan Strand, who I'm sure you know, before he
Yep.
set the NCAA indoor record of 7:30 in the 3K, said that they only did 2 track workouts leading into that race, and it was all off of cross country training. Does that surprise you at all? And how crazy is that you can run literally 4 minute pace exactly for close to 2 miles off of cross training for UNC?
It doesn't surprise me a ton. I've talked to some of those coaches there as well. It doesn't surprise me a ton, honestly. I think once you've built up that fitness, you will be able to maintain a lot of it from just the easier, slow physiological adaptation to the higher volume stuff you would have had in cross country. It's over the cross country workouts. And then as you got closer, you just had a few workouts that were specific. It doesn't surprise me a ton. There's probably a lot of contextual information that matters as well that we don't know about, where maybe he just responds well to that and another individual doesn't, or they're doing some other stuff as well, where it's always hard to say.
Going back, you mentioned zones, the hot topic, Jonah. What's your take on like
Zone
zone
two.
two training? Yeah, there you go. All the
I
rage are
think it's pretty.
overrated.
It's over. It's important but overrated, right? Like I don't think like Steve Magnus is a big mentor of mine. He's talked about this recently. A lot of mentors of mine have talked about it. There's nothing special about zone two. Like your body doesn't know. Like if you run a certain pace, your heart rate crosses a certain beat, and you're outside of zone two. There's no way your body knows, and all of a sudden there's something totally different happening in your body. It's not the case. It's more of a continuum than a hard line. The special thing about zone two is what we talked about earlier is that it's such an easy pace for most trained individuals. If you have trained and you actually have a zone two, that it comes with so little fatigue. And because comes with so little fatigue, you could do a ton of zone two and accumulate volume. And you can run a lot of volume. And if you accumulate volume, like we said, that creates some good adaptations like mitochondria adaptations, efficiency adaptations that are going to allow you to be a better runner. That's why zone two is special. It comes with so little fatigue that you can run a ton there and accumulate the necessary volume to be a great runner. But if I have an individual who does zone two for 30 minutes versus an introvert individual who only does zone three for 30 minutes or zone four for 30 minutes, the same volume, and they both recover okay, and they do that twice a week, you better believe I think the person doing zone three or zone four is getting better adaptations to the zone two because it's a higher intensity. It's a bigger training load for the same volume. And so the body's going to create better adaptations from that higher intensity at the same volume. But the elites need to do a ton of zone two because it allows them to do a ton of volume and not come with a lot of fatigue. So then when they do need to go hard in those important sessions, they can. Nothing special about zone two is what I'm trying to say beyond the fact
You're so
that you're
smart.
not going to get tired.
How do you retain all this info?
I don't know. There's probably a lot that I'm getting that I don't know, to be honest. We're just in my wheelhouse, we're in my specialty. But I've definitely realized there's a ton of stuff that I don't know. I read most days for probably 2 to 3 hours, and I've been something that I've realized over the years. One of the biggest lessons. So it's a period of my life where I was so determined by achievement and success, where the goal was to work in the NFL, work in the NBA, and I did it. And I realized that I was kind of losing my passion because at first I was driven by curiosity. And then I started to be driven by ambition to work in these certain leagues with certain logos. And since then, one of the reasons I left is I love the science because I'm curious about it. And I'm a big proponent of this theory that you should follow your curiosity and then you won't work a day in your life or whatever. So, big proponent now of just like reading about stuff I'm curious about or pursuing curiosity. And this is stuff I'm really curious about. I don't know why the human body just fascinates me.
Super simple question for you. Have you found it harder to read for that length of time, which is quite impressive, with the introduction of smartphones and iPads and TVs? And
Much
because
harder.
that's something I'm so soft, man. I used to read so much and I credit a lot of my growth as an individual to it. And this is just honest self-awareness, not trauma dumping on you, but like I'm just undisciplined because of my phone. I don't read as much. How do you find
Dude,
the ability to stay focused?
I'm gonna give you a hack. You got to get a phone lock box. It's been such a game changer for me. I mean, I rip podcasts like crazy, and with like some of the new AI technology, if I want to read a research paper, I'll upload it and like just listen to the paper. But usually from like 6 o'clock on, I try to lock my phone because I noticed a time where I was like kind of addicted to my phone, and I kind of just realized if I lock my phone up for like 12 hours from 6 to 5 or 6 to 6 every day from night, it's just like emergencies typically don't happen, and like any random email or text I get, like it doesn't make a difference if I answer in 12 hours. So that's been a big one for me is trying to lock my phone up to replace that. And like it's like, okay, I have nothing else to do. I might as well just read.
What's your recommendation? Where'd you buy yours?
Just Amazon. I was just like
Uh,
phone lock box, locking in. I don't want to know the password. See what happens. And then at first it sucked. And it was just like the classic like human experience was like, how do I unlock this thing?
mhm.
Dopamine. I need the dopamine. And then over time you kind of just get used to it.
Wow, amazing. Well, let me do that, and then I'll report back on how it goes next time I get you on.
I know. I wish I had an affiliate for that lockbox, man. Get my few cents from you buying one.
Yeah, sales are gonna skyrocket after this episode.
Need a brand influencer phone lockbox.
I love it. Or just make your own.
Yeah, exactly. Put my face on it. Sell it.
I don't want to take too much of your time, and I also really want to get you back on because I honestly feel like we're just scratching the surface, and that's so rare. 38 minutes in, and or maybe I could fly down to Austin and we do this in person when you're down there. That would be fun. But something I do want to ask you, personal question, and then one more science question, and we'll start to wrap this thing up. For you, how'd you get into this? What's the story? What was the inspiration to get into this? And how does your why, in terms of how you got started and your why for starting, differ from your current why as we speak in April 2025?
It's a great question. I think there's two things. Number one, when I was in high school, I wasn't athletic. I'm still not athletic. So just like the classic story of like I want to get any benefit I can. I started going to the weight room and I thought it was really crazy to see the progress. I think I've always been someone who's obsessed with progress and I really just like the idea of achievement and progress, which is probably unhealthy to an extent. And the weight room and running, it was really cool to see, hey, as I do this, I'm getting better and I'm getting stronger, I'm getting faster. So then I didn't really realize you can make a career out of that, helping people do that. But as I went to college, I did it more and more, and I became fascinated by the science behind it. And it kind of became an obsession where I just wanted to know why what I was doing was making me faster or stronger. And then it became really cool that I could do that with others. So I think that was my original why. And my mom was always, she's a dietitian. She's been the biggest inspiration in my life. So it wasn't my dad at my sport games. It was always my mom. She's always loved working out. So I think that's the way we really bonded and seeing her interest and seeing her run every day was something that really inspired me. I think my why now has changed where it is very much curiosity based, where that curiosity is there and stronger than ever. But as I've posted more on social media and I've as helped more just general population, not elite athletes, it's become really cool just to help translate the latest science in a world where information is everywhere and people don't know who to trust. It's been really cool to help people understand what's good science from bad science. It's actually support and help them. And like when I get messages about how much some of the stuff has helped, that's been really cool. So I think the new why is like just helping everyday people understand good from bad science and teaching them about what I'm super passionate about has been really cool and seeing it support their own journeys. And the last anecdote I'll give is I remember when I was young, when I was the reason I love to learn and read, when I was young growing up, my dad has all these books in the basement of the house I grew up in, like probably 5,000 books. He loves to read. And I used to go down there when I would just want to play Wii and play video games. I would say, this guy is crazy. I'm never going to be like him. Like, who would want to read this much when you could play video games? And now I walk into my house, and my own apartment that I have, and there's books about science everywhere. And I'm just like, what the? I've become my dad. So that's a funny anecdote I always tell people.
I love it. So good. Such a good story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And I got
two
one
more
for you.
questions and I'll save the rest for another time. Okay, let's do it. Cold plunges and sauna.
I mean, I
Hit
think the
me.
sauna's super. If like I had to choose one, I'm going sauna. Like I don't think there's anything anecdotally bad. We have some interesting research around cold plunging that it can boost recovery, but at the same time, it does potentially blunt the inflammatory response, and there's a chance that inflammatory response can be very beneficial if your goal is to like build muscle or muscle hypertrophy. So typically, like all the and it's probably natural or anything, but typically, like everyone says, like if your goal is to build muscle, I just want to cold plunge right after you do a muscle building or a strength based workout. I would just wait a little bit to not potentially blunt that inflammatory response. I just don't think cold plunging has it potentially has some good like dopamine psychological benefits and neurological benefits, but like the actual physical side, maybe it helps recovery a little bit. I'm not too convinced. Sauna is interesting too, where we do see some interesting stuff from a hormonal standpoint where it does seem to raise some hormones like growth like factors, which are potential. But it also, if you think about what happens when you're in a sauna, it's like a little mini cardiovascular workout, right? Like a little aerobic workout. Your heart rate goes up, you start sweat. So for a lot of individuals who are too trained or just anyone, it creates like a bit of an aerobic stimulus without a huge mechanical demand on your tissues, which is good. And then also, like, if you're performing or racing at heat or just an endurance athlete, like, we have some good research that passive heat training or like the sauna can lead to some physiological adaptations that can make you better at riding in the heat or maintain like hemoglobin adaptations after you've gotten them from altitude or prolonged heat training. So I think the sauna is a really interesting tool for heat acclimation as well.
Amazing. Final science question for you. Strength training. I think a lot of runners shy away from it. The
Huge.
more, yeah, huge. Okay, I knew you were gonna say that. Tell us about it.
Huge. Like, okay, I'm not gonna say huge. I think for most runners, it's a new stimulus that they haven't done before that they don't get from running. And we see some really good effects on running economy. So how efficient you are. Essentially, what happens is you get better at recruiting your muscles get stronger. So running's a sub-maximal exercise intensity. And so because it's so sub-maximal, your body becomes more efficient at running. And we just saw a really great new paper come out from a great researcher who essentially showed that that durability factor we talked about earlier, where as you get more fatigued later in a marathon, you become less efficient. Strength training can help offset that, where you don't get as fatigued throughout a marathon because essentially the theory is your muscles, joints, tendons, everything are stronger, so they accrue less damage throughout a race.
Final serious question for you. What's the anything you said? And again, we got to run this back. There's probably many
Always
more
down, man.
versions. You're a genius. What's the final takeaway message, at least in round one, that you want to give to people?
Consistency. You would much rather have B plus workouts year round than one A plus workout every day. Just show up every day, sleep well, eat well, train consistently. It's not about the home runs, and just take care of the big rocks: sleep, nutrition, stress, and training.
You said you have a question for me. Hit me.
Yeah, man, I want to know you. Like, obviously, it's been super impressive to see everything you've done at your age. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned over these past years of you doing this? Or, like, what's the biggest mistake you
Mm,
made?
could be a podcast in and of
Yeah.
itself. Biggest lesson I've learned is that
Yeah, if you're going to go back to your younger self, 16 or
yeah,
3 years
the
ago.
biggest lesson that I've learned from this is that when you take a chance on yourself and you go all in and you burn the
Mm,
boats, things happen, and the things that don't
yep.
happen for your own good, and the lessons you learn along the way form you into the type of person that allow you to accomplish the things you ultimately need to accomplish. And simply put, it makes life way more exciting when you're taking unorthodox path and you bet on yourself and you take risks. And that's the type of elsewhere. That's the type of shit that makes your life exciting. And that's the type of stuff that like
Love it, bro.
that's why we watch movies. That's why we read books. It's like think about yourself as the character in a movie, and if you were an audience member, what would you be screaming at the TV for that person to do? I think for a lot of people, that is like, get off your phone, get off the couch, don't go to college, don't settle for that 9 to 5, don't settle for the relationship that's like not bringing you fulfillment or meaning, don't settle for a life where you don't push yourself or do hard things. And I think as human beings, because we're so distracted all the time, like when was the last time you were bored? If you're listening, like for me, it's been way too long. We're not self aware. And if you're not self aware, you
Mm,
can't change. And so I think the biggest lesson I learned was that I got out of the normal life at a really good time. And I'm so grateful that I took a chance on myself. I bet on myself. And just because I did that then doesn't mean I can't do it now. So I'm constantly trying to figure out what does that look like for me now in the present stage. A risk back then was not going to college. What's that version of a risk for me now? And yes, there are healthy risks and like there are things I could do
yeah,
to
yeah.
screw up my life. But yeah, what is that? And then I would say mistake, and this is something that I'm consistently making, is a life where you care about what other people think is not your own life. And I think it's something that I
100%,
fall
bro.
into every single day. And I'm working on, and I think I generally don't really care what other people think, but it's something that I can do an even better job at, even in like real tangible ways of like, if I like someone's shoes, tell them you like their shoes. You think that it's weird, it will make their day. And if it doesn't, oh gosh, you are a nice person. So I think it has like,
Yeah, it's like
yeah,
I couldn't agree more, dude. And like the thing that like in today's day and age with social media, and everything, it's so easy to worry about what other people think. And like if you actually think about it, like most people don't care. Like most of this stuff is irrelevant, and like most people aren't going to remember this in an hour. So it's just like one of those things where it's like, how much does it actually matter?
totally.
These things, you know,
100%.
awesome.
I'll find this quote for you to end on. Because I love it and I say it somewhat consistently. It's from Alex Hormozy, if you know who that is.
Yeah,
And
I do, of course.
ready for this? So at the time, the timing of this is obviously longer, but when he tweeted this, it was 5 months. So Alex goes, "The Queen of England died 5 months ago. She ruled an entire nation and accumulated more wealth than 99.99% of humans. And yet you haven't thought about her except for this tweet. You're going to die. Everyone will move on. Do what you want." And I think that's like,
It's so
it's so
true.
true and so freeing. And you can view that as like, oh my gosh, no one cares about me. Or you can view it from like, oh my gosh, no one cares about me. Why not start a podcast and see how big I can make it? Or
Yeah,
why not like start a company? Or why not chase after a sub 3 hour marathon if that's what
if
like
like
sets your soul on fire?
if it doesn't happen, like no one's really gonna remember. It doesn't really matter.
Totally. 100%. Well, Jonah, you've been an absolute privilege and pleasure to have on. I don't say this to every guest. You can go back and listen to other ones. I don't think 45 minutes has ever gone by so fast. So we'll have to run this one back. Final question for you. The question I ask every guest on every single podcast. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
If I was really gonna choose to make for him, oh
Yeah,
man,
Gordon's
I
coming
make
over for dinner. What are you cooking?
dude. Honestly, I bake a pretty mean salmon, broccoli, and sweet potato, which is probably a pretty common sellout meal, but I feel like I eat that so much that I've really specialized it. And he would probably criticize it, but I would be happy.
I love it. Jonah, you're the man. That's like a very sports scientist meal right there. So I appreciate
Yeah,
you
keep it
staying alive
healthy.
with it. Yeah, exactly. I think you would add people like taking off if you're like fried chicken, French fries,
Yeah,
cake for dessert. But anyways, man, thank you so much for enlightening me. I feel like I grew a lot from this one, as well as it's just a blessing to like put a lot of information I know into an episode that I can share out to the masses because I know it's going to affect and impact people. And that's always the goal here. So keep crushing it, and already excited to run it back whenever that is.
yeah, man, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Such a big fan.